in the Chauvin trial.
Attorney Rocco Cipparone, a former federal prosecutor and defense attorney, is joining us live now to discuss the jury's decision on these charges. What were your first thoughts when you heard the verdict come down, Rocco?
I was not surprised by the verdict. As a defense lawyer and former prosecutor, I know that a fast verdict, and this was fast given the length of the trial, usually means a guilty verdict, and the prosecution did a really good job of presenting its evidence, so it was no shock to me.
You know, there's a lot of people pointing to a possible appeal process. Can you just take us through, you know, obviously the sentencing phase is next, but then after that, what can we expect in the next weeks and months?
So what will happen is within about 8 weeks from now, Chauvin will be sentenced. In the process up to that, they do a pre-sentence report. There's legal wrangling about whether there are aggravating factors warranting an enhanced sentence or not. After he's sentenced, I expect very much so that there'll be an appeal, and that'll probably take about a year for the appeal to wind its way through the system, and he'll sit in jail during that time. As you saw today, the judge remanded him, revoked his bail immediately, and I expect he'll be in jail through that appeal process.
Rocco, do you think it was just a home run of a case, the fact that you had that video, or was it really just prosecuted so well as an attorney? What did you think watching this entire trial?
I think with that video, that 9-minute, 29-second video, what was really a home run case, at the very least on the third count and probably the second count with respect to negligence and recklessness, respectively. But it was pretty easy to prove an assault at some point during that 9 minutes and 29 seconds for the first count. All the state had to prove was that Chauvin, at some point during that 9 minutes and 29 seconds, morphed from using reasonable force to the unreasonable use of force. And I think that video drove it home and made it, I don't want to say easy because no case is easy, but easier for the prosecution to prove. It was a very difficult case for the defense, who tried it well, by the way.
I was going to ask about the defense case. You know, if you're in the defense attorney's shoes, what could you have done differently? I know Chauvin did not take the stand in his own defense. Was that a mistake in retrospect?
You know, hindsight is always 20/20. It's always very dangerous and actually pretty rare that a defendant takes the witness stand in a case, especially one like this. I can't say in hindsight that it was a bad decision not to call him as a witness, because the cross-examination by the prosecution of Chauvin would have been brutal. If I put my former federal prosecutor's hat back on, if Chauvin was on that stand and I were cross-examining him, I would have taken him minute by minute through that video, asking him, at this point in time, what were you thinking? At this point in time, what were you thinking? When George Floyd was motionless here and gasping for breath, and the crowd was telling you that he was in pain and he was visibly exhibiting those signs, what were you thinking? I don't think he or anybody else probably could have withstood that kind of cross-examination, and I think the defense knew that.
What are your thoughts on just the massive publicity associated with this case? I mean, it's not even just across the country. It's really the world has been watching this entire time. Almost impossible, I would assume, to have a jury that is just completely unaware. So what do you think about just that massive publicity, the fact that they were sequestered for the past couple of days?
That makes the case really very difficult, especially for the defense. You know, I've tried cases that have had, you know, a heavy media profile, and selecting the jurors becomes a real challenge, especially where, as here, this media, as you said, has been so dense, it's had a worldwide profile. And it's hard to get jurors who can listen to the evidence and evaluate it on a clean slate. All lawyers and judges work hard at ferreting out jurors during the selection process, but it's really tough. It makes the stress of trying the case much more difficult. And it's really hard to know if jurors can truly put anything they've read or heard about the case previously behind them. You have to rely on their truthfulness in the process, but it's very difficult. And I've been in plenty of situations where, in hindsight, I believe that some of that infiltrated the deliberations.
And a lot of people had the same, response as soon as they heard a verdict had been reached here less than a day after closing arguments ended. And a lot of people were pointing to what they believed would be 3 guilty verdicts. So we got that. There, the jury's instructed not to, talk about deliberating before it's too soon. They are human, though, and they probably are deliberating this from day one. Your thoughts on just how little of time they spent considering this case?
I think jurors, even though we tell them to reserve their assessment and don't start evaluating the case because evidence changes throughout the trial, I think at least in their own minds they start to deliberate or evaluate the case. We hope, and I hope here, that they followed the instruction not to talk about it among themselves. But this case was really made by that video, and I'm not surprised with how quickly the verdict came in. It really doesn't shock me here. The common thread through all 3 counts was whether or not Chauvin first intended to at least assault Floyd. I don't think that was very difficult to find from the 9-minute, 29-second video. And the other two counts, I think, were much easier. Did he act recklessly and negligently? And I think both of those were easy for the prosecution in that respect. So I'm not surprised by that quick verdict, and it doesn't shock me. It also doesn't surprise me that the federal authorities, I think, are looking at potential federal criminal charges, and depending on what sentence Chauvin gets, we may see that in the future.
All right, Rocco Cipparone, attorney, with us live today. Thank you so much for lending us your expertise on this very momentous day. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right.